As is our custom this day, we will take some time to remember those members of our church family who have died since the last Festival of Remembrance service. Today we begin by remembering and lighting a candle for Phillip Jorgensen. Philip, father of Chris, grandfather to Lisa and Julie, great-grandfather to Daisy. Most of us knew Philip as the tall, gentle-spirited guy with the white hair and beard who would attend church regularly with Chris and Kathy and who would sometimes hum the hymns. But until moving to Urbandale in 2001, Philip had spent most of his life in Sioux City, where he was employed as a sheet metal worker, where he shared much of his 58 years of marriage with his wife Anne, and where they raised 2 sons in a house that he built. All his life he listened more than he talked, but especially in his later years when he experienced the onset of Alzheimer's disease. At the celebration of his life in December, we shared stories of how Philip made family a priority, how his basement workshop was like a hardware store where nearly anything of true value could be found, including the patience and the sense of the possible that he so easily shared with those he loved. He was a man who liked to lie in the grass and stare up at the sky, but he was also a man who liked to keep busy to attend to the everyday tasks of life. Even as his declining health limited what he could do, he still wanted to help and found great joy in folding laundry. Kathy could see how much he would light up when given the chance to fold, so she would save laundry for him all week, just for his visits. His association with laundry was clear to his great-grandchild Daisy, who upon understanding that, in her words, Grandpa was asleep and was not coming back, told her Aunt Lisa, "I'm worried about who's going to fold the laundry." Lisa said that she would help, to which Daisy responded, "Yeah, but you're not as good as Grandpa." Philip's son Roger assured me before the memorial service that all I really needed to say about his dad was that he was kind. A role model for many, living the kind of life for which all who crossed his path could be grateful, Philip took his final breath after more than 93 years on Thanksgiving. For his full and rich life of loving, caring, and creating, all who knew him best continue to give thanks for Phillip Jorgensen. Today, we remember and light a candle for John Hicks, who died on May 18th at the age of 84. John was an award-winning art educator who spent most of his career teaching at Drake University, gifted at identifying and nurturing the potential in all of his students. He modeled a life of learning, discovery, creativity, and thought. John was a talented artist who worked in many mediums, even up until his final months with us. He was an All-American soccer player and a passionate soccer advocate and coach. He was a prolific writer of letters to the editor of local papers, in which he conveyed his way left of center political views. And perhaps most importantly to him and those who knew and loved him best, he was a loving family man, devoted to his wife Mary Ann in his priorities and his presence, and to his sons Marty and Scott. As we celebrated John's life last spring, his sons told me how it wasn't so much what John did with and for them, but how he did things, with enthusiasm, with unapologetic devotion to what would be encouraging and supportive, with appreciation for them, not just as sons, but as people. They also mentioned how they admired his willingness to stick his neck out, to confidently take stands, to be himself through and through, and by example, teaching them to do the same. John had many blessings in his life. He had a loving marriage of respect and affection, 2 bright sons and their wives, and a grandson for which he was very grateful and proud, and many, many connections to students and friends through the years, evidenced by letters and notes of appreciation that John, in his humility, mostly kept to himself, but which following his death came to light, revealing a man whose influence stretched even further than his family may have once assumed. When he was courting Mary Ann, he wrote a letter to her parents in which he suggested that he had what it takes to make more than a satisfactory go of life, and that he would make Mary Ann happy. These things clearly happened, but he didn't fully achieve his expectations, for he also told her parents that it was unlikely he would be rich. Maybe he didn't amass the wealth that some would describe as rich, but he knew what it takes to live a rich life all the same, a life of meaning, purpose, integrity, and love. Is there any other wealth that could possibly matter as much? And finally, today we remember and light a candle for Walt Shotwell, who died on August 16th at the age of 93. After graduating from Roosevelt High School, Walt secured a job as a photostat operator at Banker's Life, where he met and soon married his first wife, Rosie, and together they had a son. Within months of the birth, however, the marriage ended, with Rosie leaving town to marry another man, taking their infant son with her. Walt was devastated and uncertain of what to do next. World War II offered him a direction. He served in the U.S. Army Air Corps, flying hundreds of combat cargo missions over Japanese-occupied Burma. Upon his return to the States following the war, Walt looked to reconnect with his son Steve, who was now 4 years old. But Rosie, in her third marriage at this point, demanded that they not have contact. Walt reflected later that he could have challenged this request, but he chose to fade away rather than cause trouble or put Steve in the middle of a protracted fight. He later wrote that this decision, made in the interest of peace, triggered a guilt that he harbored for more than 50 years. Walt married his second wife, Janice, and together they raised 2 children. During this time, he worked as a newscaster for KRNT Radio, served several stints as a newspaper reporter and columnist for the Des Moines Register. He also worked briefly in television in Minneapolis. In the early 60s, Walt began a 15-year career in political advertising, working on around 35 campaigns ranging from local to national in scope, including the campaigns of Governor Bob Ray. Walt fell victim to the stresses and frustrations of this work and later blamed it for a depression that required many months of hospitalization. During his time in treatment, Walt formed friendships with several fellow patients as they all sought to regain their footholds on life through conversation and regular bridge games. Among these patients was a woman named Mary Vettmeyer, who several years later he married, and with whom he would eventually join this church. Nearly 50 years after his son and Walt had been separated, they were finally reunited through a mutual friend, and thus began a 13-year renewal of a relationship between Walt and Steve that brought much joy to them both. Walt's final years were spent mostly in the house he shared with Mary in their beloved 43rd Street neighborhood. He enjoyed the visits of friends and family who would come to spend time with him, and he appreciated the view of nature outside their back window. Walt had much to reflect upon in considering the journey of a life well lived over 93 years, a journey with many good times, but also with some hardships and setbacks too. He was buoyed by his ability to take life as it is, without bitterness. He approached his days and nights with curiosity, sought to understand the reasons behind what people say and do, accepting the incongruities of life with a realistic resolve, and yet with a hopeful spirit all the same. The autobiography he wrote in 2005, entitled "The Rainbows Often Wane," began with a quote from Colin McCarty that reads, "If we don't ever take chances, we won't reach the rainbows. If we don't ever search, we'll never be able to find." And so we thank Walt for showing us in his resilient and creative way how to take chances, how to search, and how to find. And we thank Walt for sharing with us the rainbows he was able to reach. We have been grateful for the view.